mention that.
Oh, fuck.
And here we are for another episode of Dualistic Unity Social. I am excited about today's episode because it's kind of just a warm up to the 2 episodes that we're going to be recording later on this afternoon of Being High with Dualistic Unity. And that is very exciting to me because this is an entirely new segment, cannabis specific, where we're going to be able to interview people, have cultivators, researchers, influencers, people who just like to get high onto the show to talk about, well, not to put it, well, don't mind the pun, but to talk about dope shit. So this is going to be a lot of fun, and I'm really stoked. And we have 2 guests lined up already for today. We have other guests that we're already talking to, but we would love for you, if you have a specific cannabis influencer or somebody in the cannabis world that you would like us to talk to, do recommend it to us. Leave a comment on our Discord, join us on Patreon, let us know in a group. Hell, tell us right here. Just let us know, and we'll make a note, and we'll reach out to that person more than likely because we really want to expand this conversation, and I really like getting high.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, to kick things off for our day today, I had a brand sent me these drinks that have like 5 milligrams of THC. I don't even know what I can say or can't say. I want to be hesitant about saying too much, but yeah, kick things off with a little infused drink. So I'm very excited, and I was listening to some of the interviews that one of our guests has done. I've spoken with another guest we're having on, and yeah, very, very excited because I am green to the cannabis these days, and just very excited to learn more. Basically, like learn a little bit more about what's really going on, and like I have an overarching understanding of just even just the history of it and all of the benefits that were utilized for a very long time. Like it is, and I'm just taking this from one of the interviews that I heard earlier today, like it's the oldest medicine that we have. And yet it's been suppressed. And so I'm very curious about, as it begins to grow, as doctors become more and more educated with it, like how the system's going to respond, how big pharma is going to respond. So that's something I want to, save for our conversations later. But anyway, very, very excited. And as Ray said, if you know of anyone in the cannabis industry, like to any degree, from the extreme medical side to someone who just posts fun little TikToks about it, it's like we're willing to talk to anyone. And if you have a brand, we're doing sponsorships for it. So yeah, if you're involved in the industry, it's a great opportunity to share yourself, share your story, share what you're doing with a community who is very, very interested in hearing all about it.
And I really do want to make this very clear that we actually do have contacts in the cannabis industry. I mean, my previous job involved the cannabis industry. Both of my previous jobs were in the cannabis industry, and so there are quite a few people out there that are going to watch this show, and we're going to get their attention because the conversation is relevant, not just on an educational level, but also on an entertainment level. I mean, there's a whole culture behind cannabis, not just the use of cannabis, but the philosophy behind the plant itself, because it does in fact affect your conscious environment. It does encourage you to have a slightly slower and calmer state of mind. And so with that in mind, we're going to have some really interesting conversations, and that's going to bring out a lot of people. So if you are advertising for a brand that you think those people would benefit from, nothing that's going to make them feel like they're less of a person, but something that might add to the fulfillment that they're already experiencing, we would love to have you as a sponsor on this new series specifically. It's going to be called Being High with Dualistic Unity. You can contact us through the website, dualisticunity.com, or through LinkedIn. And we'd be happy to have you on the show, or again, reach out and give us a recommendation. I'm really excited about this. There's so much behind this, not just cannabis itself, but because we're ultimately talking about the same plant when we're talking about cannabis and hemp. And so on the other side, from, aside from the CBD and the THC, as well as all of the unexplored cannabinoids, and there's hundreds of them, because see, they've done research in terms of how THC is useful for our health, or CBD is useful for our health. But the plant itself, when used and undisturbed, when not broken down to 2 just basic elements, has hundreds of cannabinoids. There are hundreds of elements that are at play in the plant, and so the plant itself is still far more effective than just breaking it down and making synthetic THC, or just breaking it down for the THC or the CBD, right? And so there's so much to be explored on that side, not just in terms of medicine, but mental health as well. Because as with everything, I mean, of course, there could be a case made for addiction. That comes down to responsibility, as with all substances, right? So you've got that side, but then on the other side, you have hemp, which is the same plant. Essentially, it's just a slightly different strain of that plant. It's not cultivated for the THC or the CBD. It's cultivated for the fact that it's fibrous and tough as hell, right? And so you can make clothing, you can make alternative plastics out of hemp, right? There's rope, there's you can make biofeed out of hemp. Hemp oil can be used for numerous different things. Hemp itself, hemp seed, is actually, I believe, a complete protein, or very, very close to it, right? So there is so much on the hemp side, and that's the same plant. It's the same plant, not to mention the fact that growing hemp can solve a lot of our problems in terms of deforestation. You can get the same amount of pulp paper out of 10 acres of hemp that you can out of 10 acres of trees, except trees, you have to wait 10 years to crop them. Hemp, you can do it 4 times a year. So you can get the same amount of pulp paper 4 times a year. So it's just far more effective. Not just that, but hemp, the plant itself, also resists pests, and it sequesters carbon like a motherfucker out of the air. It just pulls the carbon right out of the air and puts it right back in the ground. So this is something that can be useful to us in a number of ways. And that's just scratching the surface. And so I am ecstatic to be able to bring this conversation to our audience. I'm ecstatic to be able to expand on this conversation and bring people with knowledge, people with experience, people in the field, in the industry, people who have cared for and nurtured this movement for years. I want to talk to them.
Yeah, and I just love discussing these types of things and getting helping people understand them more because there's such stigmas, like there's such deep-rooted stigmas. Because even something I was thinking about this morning and kind of I went on a bit of a run and was filmed it and was talking about just how interesting it is that the pushback that people get and response to, smoking a lot or just cannabis in general is even if they can't come up with effects of it, because like the only thing people usually go to, at least that I hear in my life, is like, oh, it makes people lazy. And it's like, I know people who smoke a bunch, two people come to mind, Ray being one of them, who smoke a shitload of weed and are like two of the least lazy people I've ever met in my life. And someone else is like someone a lot of people on TikTok probably know who like doesn't talk about it as much, but it's so funny how that's like the one thing people go to. And then the other one is, well, it can be addicting and it can do that. And it's like, it's I would argue that it's not even really, of course, any substance can be abused, but, look at something not even like an extreme thing like alcohol or an amphetamine or, an opiate, but just caffeine. Like, people drink a cup of coffee a day, all of a sudden they need 2, all of a sudden they need 3, all of a sudden they need people are having a pot of coffee. That's way more addictive than anything else. And so the addictive argument kind of falls apart when you point to something else that we do all the time. There's arguments made for sugar, and I'm not anti-sugar or anything like that. I'm like very much about the balance when it comes to health and diet and whatnot. But you know, there can be addictions to anything. And so the lazy argument, the addictive argument just kind of falls apart, especially when you compare it to things that are already existing. And again, two wrongs don't make a right. Again, not even wrongs. I don't mean to say it like that, but with just looking at a common thing like, coffee that's been kind of, I don't know, put on this pedestal in our society. Like it's a very much a cultural thing, similar to alcohol. What beer do you drink? We got the craft beer, we got the craft coffee. It's like kind of infiltrated. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with any of them. I drink plenty of beer, drink plenty of coffee, just pointing out something that exists in our society that's so normalized, and then something else that has a very, I don't know, it's hard to make too many arguments against it when you start to understand it. It's just the massive stigma. That's all that it is. People wanna think that, "Oh, being high is bad." It's like, "Hold on. There's so much more to this. There's so much more to the society that we are." right now that utilizes things for a reason. It's like, because, just to simplify things, like, as a society, most people think there's something wrong with them. They don't think they can be themselves. They avoid it. They avoid being themselves. They suppress it. They try to be something else. They try to do more. They something I was talking about before was like, because we think there's something wrong with us, we focus on building ourselves up by, making more money and getting a promotion at work, or having a really cool job title. And isn't it funny that those things that we utilize to make us feel more valuable are the things that just so happen to push our system along? And then we utilize things to help us to do that: the amphetamines, Adderall, caffeine, cocaine, even. Like, we're doing all these things to push this because we have this fundamental misunderstanding that we're not whole and complete as we are, that we can't just be ourselves, that there isn't inherently something wrong with you. And so there's certain substances that go hand in hand with that recognition. Like, imagine if everyone took a tiny little microdose of mushrooms, and then, smoked a little bit of weed throughout the day. Like, our society would be a lot different than it is. But they go hand in hand, like, they kind of reinforce each other. And so the fundamental shift has to be the mentality. But there's certain substances that supplement that shift very nicely, and certain substances that just are a response to our existing mentality and also deepen us into that existing mentality.
Well, and that kind of speaks to our larger addiction, I think. And it's interesting because we've been talking about this a lot on the podcast recently, especially about the importance of attitude towards change. Right? Whether if you're resisting the process of change, the moment to moment uncertainty of your existence, then you're going to go through a lot of different things. You're going to identify, you're going to come up with assumptions, you're going to reach for false certainty, and that's going to cause conflict. It's going to cause arguments. It's going to cause a lot of expectations to get, kind of dashed, as it were. You're going to go through suffering as a result of needing that false certainty and that sense of control. And it's just from the resistance to change. The alternative is to embrace change. And then what happens, and in doing so, you look at everything as an opportunity for growth. And as a result of you looking at it that way, it becomes that. And so this kind of goes back to what we're saying about cannabis use. If you are resisting life, if you're using cannabis to escape your life, to feel better, then that's all you're going to get out of it. And it's going to be short lived, and there's going to be consequences, because you are trying to diminish your awareness. You are trying to diminish your awareness in that you are diminishing your responsibility, and the two go hand in hand. But if you are responsible and you're not using it as a crutch, but you're using it because you can, and because there is a lesson within it, because it changes the conscious environment, whatever it is, if you're using it to, I guess, amplify your current state of fulfillment, or to accentuate it, or whatever you'd like to say, that's a different lesson. You're doing something else with it. This is the difference between people who get really high and just kind of sit there letting it do something to them, versus people who get high and then go do something regardless. Right? Because they're the ones setting the pace. And it's the same thing that we do with our mind. We either let our mind do something to us. We become its victim. Oh my God, I can't get out of my thoughts. Oh my God. And like it's something we're not doing. Or we take the role of responsibility, and we don't do that. We go, oh, I'm thinking a lot. I'm going to focus on what I'm doing regardless, and not make excuses, adding to the pile of thinking. Right. So this is why cannabis, psychedelics can be a very useful experience. If you're not used to disconnecting from your thoughts, this is an excellent opportunity for you to do so, because you're going to slow down enough to see them.
Yeah, I feel like it really does come down to your relationship with everything. Like, it kind of shows you your relationship with things, with reality, with yourself, with life, that you always sort of have, and then have these underlying things. And so, if yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess because all I can speak on is my experience, and so I don't necessarily understand someone's experience that weed, comes easy to. So I'm curious, because for me, it's always been like, it kind of shows you what's already there. And so for me, it was like paranoia, anxiety, concern, fear would come up and just like smack me in the face. And it still does, but less and less and less almost every time because I'm more relaxed in my life. Like it's very much a reflection of me. And there isn't so much, no, not that there isn't so much, but there isn't as much under the surface. So someone who does use weed as an escape, like where do you think that's coming from? Because I can't even like wrap my head around what that would be like.
Well, you see, that's the thing is that you come from you come from a background that's, not to put too fine a point on it, it sounds quite nice. Like you have nice parents, your family sounds, they sound pretty chill, and you had a pretty good upbringing, and nobody was beating the fuck out of you, and there wasn't a whole lot in terms of familial stress. So even if though you experienced stress at school and social circles and with the hierarchy of peers and all that other crap, you had a place to go to that was yours to be yourself, and so you had a way to kind of disconnect, or rather you had a way to let off steam and settle down and self-reflect. You got into sports, things like that. um, some kids don't have that. They don't have those opportunities. They don't have those outlets. I mean, it's just stress, stress, stress all the time. They go to school where they go through hell, and then they go home where they're going through childish parents or childish siblings or childish family, or they're just in an environment that's shitty. Maybe they're in foster care, like things like that. And so after a while, you start personalizing and identifying with that in the same way that you did with high school, with the way that people treated you or perceived you or anything like that. But now you're doing it with everybody all the time, and you don't know any better because you're a kid. And so the only cessation you can hope for is some distraction. And for a while, you can find that in like some kids find it in video games. Some kids find it in sex, right? Some kids find it in drugs. At the end of the day, I mean, that's what it is. They're looking for a cessation of the constant stress and suffering, the constant inundation of whether or not they're good enough, the constant torrent of doubt and fear and uncertainty and all of that. And so they're just looking for some way to shut it down. And there's nothing like smoking a big joint to give you the giggles while you watch cartoons and laugh with your buddies. It's also a very social drug, in that you can stand around with a bunch of people and just pass a joint around, and in doing so have good conversations, which often leads to a lessening of your social anxiety to some degree, especially if the rest of the time you don't feel able to do that. So there are a lot of benefits, but it's mostly, to be honest, from the traumatic side. It really is, like, from the point of view of, like, I need a break. It's the same reason that people smoke cigarettes. It really is, because cigarettes will give you a bit of a high as well. If you smoke a cigarette, you'll get a good little buzz on for a little while, and you do feel better. There is a cessation of the stress to some degree. Problem is with cigarettes is that it doesn't last very long. It's a shitty high. You can't learn shit from it, and it just leads to wanting the next smoke in 10 minutes.
Yeah. So it's almost like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, yeah, that wasn't something I had really thought about. So that kind of puts it in context a lot better then. Cause again, it's like it is all that I know. But so in that spot with someone who's using it as an escape, it's would you say that it's kind of like, any sort of tool and then people just give it all of the credit in a sense? Like if you're deep in a pit of shit and like from traumatic experiences and kind of utilizing it as an escape, it's like you can smoke it to like get yourself out of the pit to potentially start making shifts. But then if you just use it merely as the escape and the focus is all on that, then it won't have the same use or potential as if, which I guess just comes down to kind of your responsibility for yourself.
I think it's important to keep in mind that when you're going through trauma, you don't think to yourself, "How do I crawl out of the pit?" You assume your life is the pit. There's no crawling out of. The most you can hope for is a brief cessation. That's all you're hoping for. You're not thinking to yourself, "Yeah, I'm going to use this tool and it's going to help me learn about myself and that's going to change my life." Because in the pit, there is no changing your life. See, in the pit, the perception is this is it forever and I deserve it. And that's the difference. It's that level of responsibility that you're talking about that is the turning point. That's what allows us to actually make change in our life, is the acceptance that we can, the acceptance that everything we do is an opportunity to do so, including the cannabis that we've been smoking, just so we can, get lost in Ren and Stimpy for a bit. I just dated myself again. But the point is that you can use anything as a tool, or it can be an escape. It really depends, right? And for people who are lost in the idea that there is no escape, that this is just life. This is the way everybody lives. This is the human condition. Blah blah blah. Right? All they're hoping for is just a brief cessation of suffering, of stress, of not being enough. And so we look for distractions and we use things that way. But in a conscious state of mind, I mean, even having a beer can trigger a shit ton of insights. Like, that's the whole point, is that it's not the substance. It's the recognition that each substance has its own consequences and its own benefits and changes the conscious environment in a different way. The responsibility is still on us. The awareness is on us. But in trauma, that's the point of a traumatic experience, of a trauma response, is that you're just doing your best to react without awareness, because it's too much. It takes so long to unpack all of that, right? So I would say that while I would not condone cannabis as an escape, because obviously it can lead to consequences in your life, in your relationships, in your work, in your school, everything, I would say that if you must have one, it's a shit ton better than the other drugs out there, including alcohol.
No, absolutely. Okay, so all right, I'm starting to it's funny because like, even just these conversations that we're having right now is giving me so much more of a understanding of, like, the conversation we've had in regards to everything, and just and you and your focus on the mentality shift. Because even just that description, like, I do understand that in the sense of, like, I can remember when I felt awful. It was just like, not necessarily a degree of, physical trauma and all of that, but everyone, can't compare pain, all of that. And so for me, it was, it did feel like that for a while. Like, this is just it. This is just what life is. And it kind of became that. And my shift came from just the recognition, like, there's got to be a better way to live. Like, there must be something else other than this. And it was just that, the willingness to let go of my false certainty that this was it. And so that's why, so then, the utilization of something like cannabis, along with the recognition that, or even just not the recognition that the pit isn't all there is, but the question of, like, what if it isn't? Like, what if this isn't all there is? And then the utilization of cannabis or mushrooms or something like that can help kind of push that. But cannabis and mushrooms without, maybe mushrooms can shake things up a little bit as well, but those without the recognition that the pit might not be it. Maybe it's not to say that it isn't, but maybe it's not. Maybe the pit isn't the entirety of life. They can just kind of be that back and forth of temporary escape, back to the shit, temporary escape, back to the shit. Cause like, it's coming from us. And so our unwillingness to question, our clinging to certainty is almost, would you say it's like more powerful than the substance? So we can use the substance as an escape, but then if we're maintaining, like, this is it, it's not it's not going to shake us enough, because it's coming from us. Like, it's our perspective that we're holding on to, that's so powerful that it's almost like more powerful than any substance that could potentially shake us.
We are always the root of our experience. Always. We can white knuckle identity in the narrative through anything. I mean, even a psychedelic experience, even a deep, deep psychedelic experience that rattles you to your core. Within 3 to 6 months, you can go right back to the status quo. You really can. And it's just because we have that ability. We have that will to just settle back into our groove. And that groove becomes a rut, and that rut becomes a grave.
Yeah, and it happens so quick too. It really can. Like, any little thing can kind of set us back into that. And that's why the recognition that, thoughts aren't the truth. Like, that story is never going to be the truth. Because as soon as we take a little tiny bit of it to be the truth, as soon as we think, oh, maybe that idea I have of myself is the truth, it even if it's positive, like, it brings in the potential for all of hell right there. And so whether even after a psychedelic experience or something like that, like, the potential is always there, and it just comes down to us and our willingness, and I guess that's, staying on the ball, is that it's that, like, it can't be the substance. It can't be any of it. They're useful tools and they help. And then there's other things that help you just escape the back and forth. Because even with the pit, you can talk about the depths of the pit from like deep, deep trauma, but even someone who on the surface doesn't seem like they have deep, deep trauma, their pit is just their perspective. It's just their false certainty that they're holding on to. And you can hold on to that through any sort of experience. And if you want a different experience and you're simultaneously unwilling to question your idea of reality, which is your pit, like your false certainty is your pit, no matter whether it's deep fucking awful shit or just something that you're holding on to is, the right way to live and you seem fairly comfortable and, you're just holding on to your perspective super tightly. It's like your perspective is the pit. And so if you are unwilling to let go of that, then the substances, you're going to both avoid the substances. It's like you either avoid it, usually if you're comfortable, or if you're uncomfortable, you use it as an escape. And that's kind of almost the perspectives of something like cannabis in a sense. And so, yeah, it's dependent on your experience. But then if you're holding on to that, it's like to have a different experience without the need to question yourself. It's like, you go to alcohol, you go to numbers, suppressors, or something that has no regard or no push to help you question yourself, like, even caffeine or amphetamines or cocaine, things like that, that don't have that introspective component to them. You'll just go to that because you're holding on to your pit.
And this goes back to our larger overarching addiction, which is our identity, right? Because that's exactly what we do with identity. We feel uncomfortable, we reach for false certainty, and this is who I think I am. This is who I think everybody else is. This is the value that I get from thinking that. This is the idea of myself and where I'm going and where I'm supposed to go and what I'm supposed to do from all of that. And therefore, now I don't feel as uncertain. Therefore, the discomfort starts to fade. And that is just as much an escape. And every other substance we use just compounds that addiction. But free of that addiction, every other substance just becomes a choice. But that's the addiction that twists everything else.
So would you say, and sorry, I had to grab my dog. She was making a ruckus over there. So with that, the overarching mentality being that could be a right way, or that there could be a should, or there could be, a correct way of living that we hold on to, despite recognizing that there isn't, like, just the recognition that maybe I don't know. Maybe I don't know the right way. Is that as basic as it is? Like, are people just holding on to their idea of the right way to act, the right way to live, the right way to be, the right way to, the right thing to believe so tightly that even just the recognition, like, maybe it isn't, is so jarring that people avoid that? Like, a part of me is like, how the fuck?
It's control, man.
Yeah.
That's all it is. Like I said, it's fear and control. Isn't it? All of these thoughts are byproducts. They're not the problem. They're byproducts. They're the experience that we're using to escape that fear. And ultimately, it all comes down to I want to be in control. I want to think about the things that I want. I want to think about the things that I desire that would make me more. And we immediately get into that mentality rather than going, whoa, 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 whoa. I just created a whole bunch of lack in myself. But we've done that for so long and collectively as a culture that we never stop to go, the thing I'm thinking about isn't me. Because it would require us to let go of the idea of being able to satisfy a lack that isn't there until we create it. That's The whole paradox about this is that we're trying to satisfy something that isn't there until we create it. And as soon as we create it, we're like, I got to solve that. And as soon as we try to solve that, we've created it again. And we go through this continuous loop, not recognizing it's the wanting to solve anything that's the addiction. It's the wanting there to be a problem. The path is there, the journey's there because you put it there to avoid what you are. And what you are is already whole. You're everything that you could hope to be if you would just allow yourself to express it. Right? It's just we miss that. We're too busy trying to feel in control, and we get so lost in that it creates a whole fictitious world, and it blocks us from everything that's happening.
Yeah, you said something yesterday that has stuck with me, that we want it to be about us. Like, we really, really want it to be about us. And there's this fundamental, like, there's this deep, 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 deep thing, an avoidance of yourself, an avoidance of the reality of what you are, that goes, it's almost like so fucking deep rooted that it goes hand in hand with experience. Like, it goes hand in hand with being able to have experience. Is it has to be about me, because therefore I can have this experience, and it's just the investment and our ideas of ourself and ego and all of that, like, totally neutral thing, a tool, simply a tool that allows us to have experience. We so heavily invest in it, though. And so that's just it. And we say it all the time, but that's just it. It isn't, because even that, like, the investment, it's a scale. There's not a correct answer. And I had a number of conversations with people when I was in New York last week, that just talking about the investment. It's just the investment in it. And it's almost like uncomfortable for people to see that it's a sliding scale. That's all that it is. It's not about, not no ego or full ego, or just do this, just follow these, like objective black and white things. It's like, it's gray area. All of it is gray area. Your experience is going to be dictated based upon how heavily you invest in you, in the idea of you. And so we do it like, we want it to be about us, because it has to be about us to it. It's almost like it needs a tiny bit of us to have the experience. Like, we need a drop of it to be it and perceive a division at all. But then it's like I almost know that I need a tiny bit of it, but then I just run with it. And then I'm like, oh, and this must mean this, it must mean this, must mean this. And as soon as there's a drop of it, it's like I no longer recognize how clearly I am whole, how clearly I am everything. So I need a little bit of control. I need to know. I need to know what responses are, what is going on, where I'm going, because I don't fully recognize what I am and what this is and what's happening. And so it's almost like wanting it to be about us is like inherent, but it's like, how much do you want it to be about you?
And you don't get to start there. No, you don't get to start by dipping your pinky in and deciding how much you want to jump in the pool. No, you get thrown in the fucking pool, right? With all the waves and all the torrents, and now it's like, figure shit out. And then we wonder why we feel like we're drowning, right? And as we've mentioned at the retreats, life or uncertainty very much is like that. It's like being in this pool of potential, and you can let it drown you, in that you can let it get on top of you. You can start to feel like it's more than you and let it just push you down. Or you can change your mentality and learn how to float, tread to the surface, and eventually you can surf on that shit. You can have fun with it, right? But it's so much, and it's just like water. If you're at the bottom of that water, that's a lot of pressure, right? But at the top of the water, it's a whole other world, right? And that's very much what we're dealing with in terms of change all the time, right? And we just get thrown into it. And of course we identify, and of course we reach, because we don't recognize how much we're being exposed to. It's funny, you were saying, like, it's like we have a drop of identity. It's like, nah, it's the whole thing. The perspective of the observer versus the observed is the experience. But with that experience goes all of the perceptions of that experience, not just some. It's not like we start with some. We start with all of them, all of it, all available all the time. And then we're just desperately clinging to something like a stick in a river, hoping not to be carried off, not recognizing that it's the reason we're being pummeled by the waters because we're fighting it.
Oh man. I like the weight example because I was kind of thinking of it like, we see, say it's like bottom of a pool, say it's 100-foot pool or an infinite pool, and we see a little reflective thing at the bottom. We're like, oh, I want that. That's going to mean something about me. And it's like, but then, okay, so this is like happening in my head right now. So we'll see how this ends up. But it's like a massive pool, an infinite pool. And everyone say it is just people swimming in the pool. And everyone notices this little thing that's there at the bottom of the pool. And it's reflective. It's a reflective thing, but they don't realize that. And so they start swimming down to it because it's so pretty, but they want to be the one that gets there. And so along the way is like the journey of fucking, I don't know, society. They're like comparing themselves. They're like, how fast can I swim? How am I doing relative to how everyone else is doing? I need to get there first. I need to get to the top. And that's like us fucking trying to become Jeff Bezos. Everyone trying to be like have all the money in the world. And then so then hypothetically say they get there or someone gets there, and this kind of reminds me of Jim Carrey's quote, but someone gets there and then they realize that it's just a reflection of what's on top of the water. It's just a reflection of where they came from, that they so heavily invested in along the way, felt so much weight and pressure as they were swimming down to the bottom of the pool to find this thing that was just where they came from. Or it's like they swim to the bottom and it's just, you know, they swim through it and then it's like they're back on the surface in a sense. And they had so much concern, desire to get there despite not realizing that they can just stop swimming and get there as well. They can just let go and get there as well. And it's like, so it's like that's almost the journey of life in a sense, like striving control versus letting go. I'm swimming down to the bottom, I get to measure my progress. I get to be sure that I'm doing this relative to everyone else. It's like it's just people recognizing that that isn't what we think it is. Like you don't even get there. It's like you never get to that point, but the whole time, if you were to get there, it would just be where you came from. And it's just that. And that's why, like the Jim Carrey quote, I wish everyone could figure out their hopes and dreams and achieve all of them to realize that it's not the answer. And it's that process of letting go and just floating the top. Like if you stopped swimming, if you stopped striving, if you stopped chasing, you would just float to the top, and then you'd get to the same spot that everyone else is striving for, because it's not a spot. It's where you are. It's what you are here and now. That's it. And there isn't like we it's so interesting how we strive. We can strive our whole fucking lives for this thing that we never get. Like we never get, because it's the striving. That's the cessation that we get to that we appreciate. And it's just the striving itself that's creating the weight, that's causing the weight, that's creating all of the pressure as we go. And if we were to just, stop swimming to the bottom, we would float to the top and then realize that, oh, we can do things and there's so much less weight. So you have more of an ability to do things. So yeah, that was my little imagery coming to mind.
It's well said. It's just important to remember that at every depth, there is a different level of thought that goes with it. Like we interpret the pressure in terms of thought and emotion. Somebody was asking this the other day. Like, do you think thoughts create emotions? I said, no. Thoughts and emotions are both results of your perception of how you perceive your relationship with what is. Right? The more you're separate from it, the more your thoughts and emotions are going to reflect that. Right? And it's not to say that the emotional spectrum isn't there. It's just that you interpret it differently as that divisive mentality or as that divisive perception starts to fade. right? Like, it's not like you don't feel fear. You just recognize that it's an emotion. It's not necessarily based on a division that's actually there. It's based on a habit of perceiving yourself in a way that you can't handle something. That's where the fear comes from. It's habitual self-perception that you're not enough to deal with it.
Yeah, it's just like based on assumptions, right? Like I'm going to assume this about myself and then I'm going to be afraid and then I'm going to assume this idea of myself that has certain things that, I can and can't do. I'm going to assume that people are going to perceive me in this way. I'm going to make all of these assumptions about what's going to happen based on something as opposed to letting go of that, as opposed to questioning that, as opposed to being willing to realize that those assumptions are just assumptions. Like it's it's the assumptions that we do to try and have control over a thing that is where all of the shit comes from. Like the emotions and the thoughts and the concern are based on fundamental misunderstandings about yourself, fundamental misunderstandings about what you are. And so of course they're going to come with all of those consequences to a degree. And the desire to be seen as more, it's like there's always double-edged swords to it. Like you can't invest in the idea that your value is being increased without the simultaneous fear of it being decreased. Like they always go hand in hand. And it's like if you're playing that game, you're playing both sides. You're stepping into the ring where you're going to be in flux all the time. And it's not to say that if you're not in that ring, the chasing of the carrot, the running from the stick mentality, it's not to say that you're not going to go through ups and downs, but it's it's almost a component of like it makes me wonder if I didn't grow up, if we didn't grow up in a society that had those fundamental things, like if we couldn't maybe not go through so many ups and downs and emotions. And and even that, I'm not saying that like that's a better experience necessarily, but I think a lot of even when we start to let go, even when we're not striving for so many things, the shit that still comes up, it's like, oh, still going through a bunch of shit, even though I'm not trying to get anywhere. It's like it's a product of investing in that for a very long time.
Collectively,
Yeah.
that's the thing. That's where Jung had it right in the collective subconscious or collective unconscious. Like we are all very much dealing with the same collective cultural programmings, right? Like how many people believe in heaven and never believed in Christianity? Let some bleed over right there. See what I'm saying? So we do have to wrap up this conversation because we're at the end of our time. I want to mention to everybody we're going to continue this conversation in 15 minutes on Patreon for another hour and a half. You can join us. Go to patreon.com/dualistic unity, or you can find the QR code there on the screen. We chat with people 5 days a week. The community is by far our greatest strength. It is the reason that Dualistic Unity continues on and continues to grow. And we would love for you to be a part of that. You can chat on the screen if you would like to. You don't have to. You can also chat just by audio or in the text section. You don't have to be on the screen, though we encourage you to push your limits, to be vulnerable, to go beyond what you think you can do with this community because everybody else is trying to do the same. And so it's definitely the place to go if you're looking for a community of people who are just being themselves and want you to do the same.
Absolutely. Looking forward to talking to some of you in about 15 minutes. Bye, everyone.